ever open up a textbook and think, this isn't going to fly with my students. Today, we're really digging into adapting materials, making those ELT lessons pop.
It's like the teacher's dilemma, right?
Yeah,
You have this diverse group, each learner unique, and the textbook, well, sometimes it just doesn't cut it.
I remember once trying to teach the present perfect, talking about museums from some textbook dialogue. My students, obsessed with this boy band. I spent that prep wishing for a better way to make those materials connect.
You see, you already sensed that disconnect, that gap between the material and the learners. That's where having a good framework is essential, just like the competency framework you've been looking at in your notes.
Those notes are great, full of information, but sometimes I just want that quick fix. Like, how do I use this framework without writing a dissertation for every lesson plan?
And that's what we're here for, to help you put those notes into action, save you time, and make your teaching even better.
That's what I like to hear. My notes talk about understanding the learners, making activities engaging, sequencing. That's a lot to handle. Where do we even begin?
Well, your notes highlight a great place to start the layout category. It might seem simple, but a well-designed layout can really make or break how a student experiences the material.
Layout, meaning how the materials look visually. To be honest, I usually focus more on the content.
Of course. But think about it. Have you ever gotten totally lost in a poorly designed textbook? Flipping through pages, can't find what you need.
Yeah, totally. I tried using a language learning app once. The text was squished together, the colors gave me a headache, and finding the audio button felt impossible. I totally lost motivation.
Exactly. That frustration is what those notes are trying to address. By thinking about things like navigation, color use, icons, we can make materials much more user-friendly.
Okay, I'm seeing layout in a whole new light now. It's not just about making things look pretty.
Exactly. It's about reducing that feeling of being overwhelmed, that cognitive overload. Clear navigation, smart use of color, icons in the right places. They seem like small things, but they can really impact a student's experience.
It's amazing how these small details can make such a difference. Speaking of making a difference, one thing my notes talk about is tailoring things for different learners. It's rare to have a class where one size fits all.
Absolutely. And your notes bring up a very common situation. Mixed level class, students from all different backgrounds, and a textbook that just isn't working for everyone.
I've been there. It's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole.
It really is. And your notes offer some good solutions. Remember those three words: modification, extension, supplementation.
Okay, so those are about actually changing the materials, right?
Yeah. Let's say you have a reading passage that's just too difficult, too much for your beginners. Modifying it could be as simple as shortening the sentences, maybe swapping out some of the harder vocabulary.
Makes sense. So instead of throwing out the whole passage, we're making it more digestible?
Right. Then you've got extension that's adding to the material. With that same passage, maybe you do some vocabulary work before they even see the text, or come up with some discussion questions for after, things that connect it back to their own lives.
So it's like we're building those bridges between the material and what they already know.
Exactly. And then supplementation, that's where you're pulling in other stuff entirely, like authentic materials, news articles, song lyrics, heck, even a recipe if it fits the theme.
Oh, I love using authentic materials. I used a recipe for apple crumble in my class once, and it turned into this whole discussion about baking in different cultures. They were making so many personal connections with the language. It was great.
There you go. You got it. That's the power of supplementation, bringing that real-world element in, making the language come alive.
It's so much more engaging than sticking to the textbook examples. But another challenge my notes bring up is managing cognitive load. I have to admit that one always makes my head spin a little.
It's an important one, though, especially when we're thinking about adaptation. It boils down to how much mental effort is involved in learning something.
Right, like if you try juggling too many things at once, you're bound to drop a few.
Exactly. Our students' brains are the same way. If we overload them with new information, they're not going to process it. Your notes actually describe a lesson where the teacher gave this reading passage. It had tough vocabulary, complex grammar, tons of historical context all at once.
Oh, wow, that's a lot to throw at them. What happened?
The students were so busy trying to understand individual words and sentences, they missed the big picture. By the time they got to the comprehension questions, they were lost.
So how can we avoid that kind of overload? What are some things teachers can do to manage cognitive load well? So how can we avoid that kind of overload? What are some things teachers can do to manage cognitive load well?
Your notes has some really good strategies. One big takeaway is breaking down information, like chunking. So instead of that whole dense passage at once, maybe the teacher divides it smaller chunks, one paragraph at a time, even just a single sentence if it's really tough.
Makes sense. Let them digest it bit by bit instead of getting overwhelmed by the whole thing.
Exactly. And while you're chunking, you can use other strategies from your notes too, like visuals. Imagine pairing each little piece of text with a picture, maybe a diagram or even a short video, something to help them actually see what it's talking about, make those connections.
Right, we forget how powerful visuals can be, like, a picture's worth 1,000 words and all that.
Totally. And don't forget about tying the information back to what the students already know, their experiences. Can you connect that reading passage to something you've already done in class? Any links to current events, pop culture, anything to make it relevant to their lives. It'll be so much easier for them to learn and remember.
Okay, yeah, it's all coming together now. So we've talked about adapting existing materials, but what about going beyond the textbook?
Ah, you're thinking like your notes, because that's where that article, rpw3.pdf, comes in.
Hmm.
It's all about truly getting to know your students as individuals even before you meet them in class.
I remember that, talking about sending letters or questionnaires ahead of time. It's brilliant, finding out about their learning styles, what they want to achieve, even before the course begins.
Right. Game changer. And it goes beyond that too. Emphasizes continuing to learn about your students as you go along. Things like 50-second talks, those short little informal presentations where students talk about something they're passionate about.
Such a cool idea. Gives them a chance to share their interests and for teachers to get a glimpse into their lives outside of class. I'm adding that to my list for sure. It also mentioned learning contracts. Those were agreements between the teacher and student about goals and assessment, right?
Absolutely. It's moving away from that, teacher-centered approach. It's about collaborating, putting the learner at the center, giving them a voice. Speaking of which, there's this really great activity in the article, the group profile, which does double duty, builds community, and gives you information. Imagine you start with a basic question. How many of you like to read novels?
Okay, easy enough.
Right. And depending on how they answer, you create a sentence that reflects the group. Maybe it's, most of us love to read novels, or we have mixed feelings about novels. They write that sentence down. Then another question and another, slowly building up this profile of the group.
I love that. It's interactive, you get insights, plus it's a great icebreaker, especially for that first day. It even encourages them to think about themselves, how they fit into the group as a whole.
Exactly. And the best part, as they get comfortable, they can even start suggesting their own questions, really take ownership, and learn more about each other in a natural, organic way.
It's incredible how powerful these simple techniques can be. It's not just about giving them information, it's about building connections, making them excited to learn.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, you don't have to do everything at once. Pick one or two things that resonate with you and your teaching style. Give them a try. Experiment, reflect, adapt, just like you want your students to do.
It's a continuous learning journey for us all, right? As we wrap up this deep dive, one last thought. If giving students ownership makes them more engaged, what if we took it a step further? What if they didn't just shape the activities, but had a say in choosing the topics themselves? Something to think about as you keep adapting your materials and keep transforming your teaching.